Welcome back to the Army Painter Studio. We've got another tutorial for you. This one's going to be a little bit different. We are leaning on our loyal members of the factory team to help us celebrate the latest edition of Warhammer Horus Heresy from our friends at Games Workshop. In this series of 2 tutorials, we're going to show you how to paint a Salamanders Marine and Dreadnought, as well as an Iron Warriors Marine and tank. Good guys do come first, so we're going to begin with maybe the only true good guys in the Warhammer universe, the Dragon Warriors, the Sons of Vulcan, the Loyalists of Nocturne. And who best to teach you than the Horus Heresy expert himself, Metters Miniatures. Metters is going to be using a wealth of products across the Army Painter Warpaints Fanatic, Masterclass, Warpaints Air, and Speed Paint ranges. He's beginning with a base coat of Banshee Brown using our base coating brush from our hobby brush range. That was a lot of B's to say in there. Now, anybody that follows Metters Miniatures on YouTube and Instagram, and if you don't already, you should, you know that he is an avid user of an airbrush, and he's going to use that a bit sparingly in this tutorial. We're going to see a lot of brush work and even some sponge work, as he's become a big fan of using makeup sponges. You can tell that Metters is a big fan of the Masterclass range. He's using Midnight Olive and Blighted Green, once again from the John Blanche sets. And he's applying this with a makeup sponge in almost a zenithal fashion. You can achieve a very, very similar effect using our Masterclass dry brushes to stipple on those layers. I like to recommend that you keep the paint a little bit loose with a little bit of water just to thin it down to help prevent any of the stipple or sponge marks as you're applying this, but you'll see how great this tool can be. While Metters is a professional, it really is as easy as it seems on camera here. What I really love about this type of tutorial is that it gives you a good sense of how you might paint an army, because we're not just painting the rank and file Marine, we're painting a Contemptor Dreadnought. Throughout this tutorial, we will repeat the steps across both of the miniatures so that you can see how these techniques translate from smaller to larger scales. Similar to airbrushing, you're going to work up these highlights in concise layers, leaving some of the previous colors in the recesses and shadow. You can see some of that Banshee Brown in the recesses. Now with Midnight Olive, we're just going to push the volume and raise the contrast of this green on the armor. With a more refined application, we will use Woodland Camo from the Warpaints Fanatic range, and we will apply this just a little bit more sparingly, and you can see this go from a dark ruddy green back up to a nice bright green. One thing that I really love about the way Metters paints his miniatures is that he tends to start with a contrasting base color. He's using brown in this instance for the green, and then he'll come back in with some ruddier colors later on. You'll definitely want to stay tuned to the very end to see what he does with speed paints to help smooth out some of these shadows and really make the green on this armor pop. When stippling or using a sponge to add volume to your miniature, if you overdo it, it's okay. You can always go back to your previous colors and blend them back in and work those volumes until you're happy. What he's doing throughout this process is he's applying these volumetric highlights where he believes the light is going to hit. Now, if you're ever in doubt, the rule of cool always applies, especially when it comes to army painting. So if your gut says place a highlight here, like on the back of this leg armor or the top of this hip joint pad here, then you're doing it just right. Our final bit of sponging, we're going to use Camouflage Green once again from the Warpaints Fanatic range. We're just going to be very sparing here in the application. Following the highest points on the miniature is where we're going to go ahead and apply this. A great tip for army painting is never to be too precise. Visual interest is key, and adding some rough edges, rough highlights, and rough sponging like we're doing here with a torn up piece of sponge is going to go a long way in adding visual interest across the miniature. It's helping to make some interesting weathering without being too overt. Be light-handed here, you could always apply more later on. You can see here on the Dreadnought's chassis or torso, I guess you would call this, I don't know, the top of the sarcophagus? He's applying that camouflage green to the most raised areas and hardest edges. This is what I was talking about before. Sam Lenz, also from the factory team, likes to call this anti-zenithal. I I love using our speed paints through an airbrush, just like Metters is doing here, to blend in and add some shadows. And he's using hardened leather. And this is a really smart call here because it mimics the tone, but is a little bit brighter, a little bit ruddier than that Banshee brown base coat. But this ties it back to those deep shadows. He's focusing this mostly on the areas where the joints of the armor exist. And once again, the anti-zenithal from the bottom up. Now he'll do the same thing with the airbrush on the marine miniature. He'll be a little bit more careful though. The larger miniatures are a bit more forgiving for this step. Now, we know many of you might not have an airbrush at home, and that's a real shame because our Warpaint's air range is fantastic and it makes airbrushing super, super simple. But using speed paints through them as a tint or a glaze is a low-key pro move, and it almost makes investing in an airbrush worth it. You'll see at the completion of this tutorial why that is. He's going to push those shadows even further, this time using Speed Paint Satchel Brown through the airbrush. And this is really, again, clever because Satchel Brown moves even more towards the red shade of a ruddy brown. You might be asking yourself, why would you use red to add shadow to green? That's because they're contrasting colors. Because they exist on opposite ends of the color wheel, using these deep brownish reds is going to make the green pop even more. And it's going to make the shadows seem even more realistic. Clean up your airbrush and grab your bristle brush. It looks like he's still using our hobby base coating brush here. This high value synthetic is getting a lot of work in these Horus Heresy tutorials. We're going back to the camouflage green that we hope you had on either your wet palette or your Wargamer XL wet palette at home. We're going to apply some very simple edge highlights on the hard creases of the armor. For those at home that are intimidated by this fine line work, you shouldn't be. Thin your paints for added control. You can use a little bit of the Warpaint stabilizer even to help here. Load the bristles of your brush consistently and just drag the edge of the brush along these hard edges. Hold it as perpendicular as you can for a perfect clean line almost every time. If you don't follow Metters already, again, you really should, especially if you're an army painter or a Horus Heresy fan. This guy was meant to be on the Army Painter Factory team because he is a true army painter. He showcases a lot of clever techniques and hacks to achieve excellent looking effects really simply. Now we're going to go on to some of the black pieces of the armor. Salamanders are known for flames, and they're also known for alternating black armor plates. Now we're going to paint this helmet in black. It's been primed in matte black, and we're just using deep gray here from the Warpaint's Fanatic range, and again that sponge, and we're going to apply our first volumetric highlights. We'll apply those highlights to the helmet and also the knee pads for this dreadnought. Our next refined application will be ash gray from the Fanatic range, once again using that trusty makeup sponge. Personally, I'm really bad at applying transfers, and I wish it was as easy as Rob made it seem. I've been told for years that it's really not that difficult, so I must be doing something wrong. So I'm going to pay very close attention to how Metters is going to use our gloss varnish, some water, to apply these transfers. This is a great pro tip for anybody that does apply transfers or even freehands their own decals and designs on their armies. After the transfer has set, you can take some of the colors that you have from underneath and you can sponge them or scratch them on with a traditional bristle brush, and this helps to marry it to the armor before you seal it. This tiny bit of weathering really adds to the realism in the finished effect. Once you're happy, now is a really good time to go ahead and apply a varnish. Metters is actually using a mix of our airbrush matte and satin varnish here, which is a really clutch move. Never thought about doing that. Not just using a standard piece of pick and pluck foam. This actually looks like some kitchen sponge. Metters is taking some of that Banshee brown from before. Again, this makes a lot of sense. This is that undercoat, that shadow coat, and he's going to apply this as the first bit of chipping on top of the armor. When he's finished with that, he's going to take some gunmetal from our Warpaint's Fanatic Metallics range, and once again has that hobby base coating brush, and he's going to begin blocking in all of the metals on these miniatures. Once you've picked out all of the metal details that you want, go ahead and use some strong tone from the wash range and apply this liberally all over the metallics on this miniature. Using this deep brown wash really gives an oily, worn effect to all of the metallics, and I really love this choice. It's a great combination. Usually when you think of mithril and blood effects, you probably think of blood splatter and weathering and gore on a knight or something like that, but in this case, we're going to show you how to use those two things in a very different and clever way. Applying mithril, the brightest Warpaint's Fanatic silver in the metallics range, we're going to apply this to the lenses on the miniatures. Once he's happy, he's going to take True Blood. Now this is a very high gloss, semi-transparent red that's meant to be a blood effect, but because of that slight transparentness and the gloss that's inherent to the paint, it really makes these lenses look like glowing red lenses. Maximum effect, minimal effort. I believe he's using a Wargamer small dry brush and some plate mail metal. He's going to add just a very faint dry brush to all of the metallics now that that strong tone has had time to dry. Emperor Gold from that masterclass range that we did with John Blanche is a great base tone gold, and he's using this to block in some of the gold details on these miniatures. Using the Warpaint's Fanatic Dark Red Tone Wash, he's going to apply this all over those gold bits. I'm not going to lie, before I say what I'm about to say, I did say that this was a heat bloom effect, and I had to go back and do a quick Google search just to make sure that I was correct. I'm proud to say that I was. To apply this heat bloom effect to the barrels of these melt guns, we're starting once again with hardened leather or speed paint through the airbrush. Now, you could do the same by glazing this color with a bristle brush. It'll just take a little bit more time. Then with a bit of Grim Black, he's going to follow that up just on the very tips of the barrel. You could go with a purple here or even a blue if you really wanted to push it, or if the miniature was just a little bit bigger. But in the effort of getting this on the tabletop as quickly as possible, going right to Grim Black would yield some really nice results. I'm going to jump to the helmetless head of our Marine. We're starting with a dry brush using the Masterclass Moderate Dry Brush, and we're applying matte white over top of the facial features of this Salamander Marine. Notice as he's taking his time here and he's working up those layers, letting the paint dry a little bit before he goes back so he doesn't build up too much dust, because that can happen when you're dry brushing. A good tip to help prevent that is to keep the bristles a little bit moist as you're dry brushing. It sounds counterintuitive. You might want to practice it a bit, but trust me on this one. The Salamanders chapter are very well known for their dark obsidian skin. We're using thinned down Grim Black to apply a simple glaze over top of the skin tone. Off camera, Metters is just going to dot the eyes with a bit of pure red. As you'll see on the turntable, I think I've counted right. I think he only used 18 colors, not counting varnishes. You'd never think that by looking at the finished results. Join me in thanking Metters for helping us celebrate the new edition of Horus Heresy with this first tutorial in our Horus Heresy series. The best way you could thank him is to visit him on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, wherever he has pages. Give him a subscribe, like his videos, and you'd be doing yourself a favor if you want to learn some handy, clever armor painting hacks. To learn more about Metters Miniatures and the rest of the factory team members, head on over to thearmypainter.com. While you're there, you can learn more about the paints used in this tutorial, the rest of our range, including some handy, easy to add to your cart bundles, accessories designed to make miniature painting fast, easy, and fun. You can also learn more by visiting your friendly local game store or preferred online retailer. Visit us at thearmypainter.com today.